This video series explores the seminars of Jacques Lacan. I don't claim to be presenting some definitive understanding of Lacan, but will be exposing you to my own process of working through his thought, trying to unpack central ideas found in the text. Please subscribe and feel free to provide comments and questions below in response to these videos. In the last video, we discussed how the work of psychoanalysis concerns addressing the third element, the unconscious. In the first part of Lacan's fourth lecture, entitled The Ego and the Other, he discusses the connection between resistance and transference. Lacan begins with a passage from Freud's text entitled The Dynamics of Transference. Here, Lacan addresses the relationship between resistance and transference, which goes something like this. Resistance makes itself felt as the subject approaches the pathogenic nucleus. It's expressed in discourse, often as silence, and thus as the breaking of the fundamental rule of psychoanalysis. It's here, this silence, where transference emerges. Lacan quotes Freud here, who writes, "When the patient is silent, there is every chance that the drying up of his discourse is due to some thought relating to the analyst." Transference emerges because it satisfies the demand of resistance. We need to be careful by what Lacan means by transference, as is often a misunderstood concept. Transference is both a positive and negative moment for Lacan. It's the means by which the symbolic determinants of the subject can emerge, often through repetition, but it's also what impedes progress, at least in its imaginary aspect, when it rises to consciousness as love and hate for the analyst. Now, there's a relationship between resistance, transference, and memory, or more specifically, forgetting. Resistance impedes speaking the truth. It degrades speech as remnant pieces of signifiers become detached from the larger system of signifiers. Transference, at the imaginary level, displaces those dislodged signifiers onto the analyst, who becomes the object of love and hate. If we keep in mind that the unconscious is a kind of memory of the subject's history, and this history is made up of that chain of signifiers, we can see how resistance and transference constitute a kind of forgetting. At the point in which transference is being produced, the analysand may become aware of the analyst's presence. What does this mean, to become aware of the analyst's presence? We have to think about this in terms of the function of speech. Transference meets the demands of resisting full speech, a speech that would reveal the unconscious. When speech halts, it degrades into empty speech, a speech that fails to reveal the truth of the unconscious. This is something we'll discuss further in the next video. Such empty speech no longer speaks from the unconscious, the subject, but is rather speech emanating from the ego and being directed at another ego, in this case the ego of the analyst. The analyst comes into being, is made present, through the mediation of speech. This constituting of the other, the bringing the analyst into presence, is transference. The presence of the analyst is a moment that allows the analysand to function in the imaginary, to relate to the other as one ego to another, and thus to avoid the truth of the unconscious, and serves as a form of resistance. Admittedly, this is rather difficult to get our minds wrapped around, and this is a particularly difficult lecture by Lacan. Speech, which derives from the symbolic, is also what gives rise to the presence of the other as imaginary alter ego. Resistance, which functions at the level of the imaginary, gives rise to transference, which functions at both the symbolic and the exchange of signifiers and at the imaginary. So how are we to make sense of this? We're given some clue by Lacan when he states that our aim is to establish a perspective, a perception in depth of several planes. We are accustomed to thinking of the symbolic and imaginary, or the id and ego, as contrasting pairs that can be treated separately. However, Lacan doesn't treat them as such. He says that we have to instead establish a stereoscopic perspective. A stereoscope is a device in which two photographs of the same object are taken at slightly different angles and are viewed together, creating an impression of depth and solidity. Slavoj Žižek, not coincidentally, converges on a similar notion in his work, The Parallax View, where he argues that one approach antinomies or contradicting positions in such a way that doesn't treat them as contrasting pairs, nor something to be synthesized into some third position. Rather, we must move back and forth between these positions, attending to their non-collapsible interstices, that gap that resides between the positions. This deviates from the standard portrayal of the Hegelian dialectic, but according to Žižek, this is more authentically Hegelian, as Hegel's notion of Aufheben has been largely misunderstood. Rather than amounting to some neat synthesis between a thesis and antithesis, Aufheben, or sublation, is both the abolishing and preserving of the thesis and antithesis. And it's this position proposed by Lacan as stereopsis and Žižek as parallax that encapsulates Lacan's general method, if I can put it that crudely, and it's why this series is entitled Thought in Motion. When it comes to Lacan, thought never settles on a stagnant point or rests in any binary opposition. It's always playing off the dynamic tensions among concepts and positions, and this constitutes the heart of his thought. Here are the central ideas covered in today's video. 1. Transference emerges because it satisfies the demands of resistance. 2. Resistance and transference are forms of forgetting, as signifiers become dislodged from the larger system of signifiers and becomes relocated in the imaginary other. 3. In being relocated in the imaginary other, the analysand may become aware of the analyst's presence, as the other only comes into being through the mediation of speech. 4. To appreciate the unfolding of this logic in psychoanalysis, which can seem contradictory at times, we must learn to see from a stereoscopic viewpoint that can live in the dynamic tensions of conflicting concepts coexisting in the same moment. In the next video, we'll return to Lecture 4 to address Lacan's important distinction between revelation and mediation, and the corresponding distinction between full speech and empty speech. Thank you for watching. Feel free to ask a question or leave a comment, and please subscribe if you want to see more. I'll see you next time.